Today I am joined by James Wilks. He is winner of the Ultimate Fighter, film producer, and creator of Game Changers. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so something I wanted to do today is responding to some of these crazy reels that the algorithm feeds them to me. Let's start.
But you do not need to eat carbs. I haven't eaten a single carb piece of fruit or vegetable in 6 years, and I'm not dying of low energy, nor have I wrecked my hormones. I've actually lost 25 pounds.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, there's a few points there. Now, she lost weight. It's also been shown on a Twinkie diet, where someone's only eating Twinkies, right?
What?
There's all sorts of ways you can lose weight. You can take cocaine and lose weight. It doesn't mean that it's good for you. In fact, and I've seen their blood work that they posted publicly online, and it was terrible.
The Game Changers. The Game Changers has been quoted so many times. What they don't tell you is that 3 or 2 of the superstars that were at the time vegans left the diet before the documentary got released. That's crazy.
So number one is that's completely false. I don't know where he gets that claim from. Number two,
There's a YouTube channel called We Are Stupid, and he's basically saying that it's okay for you to be vegan, but if you are having your children grow up on a vegan diet, it's irresponsible for you to do that. So I wanted to know from your opinion, if you raise children on a vegan diet, can they be getting all of the nutrients that they require?
well, I think it's a little bit nuanced. So I think in terms of
Half of the things that we're seeing online is just literally not based on any science or any facts though.
yeah, and also what I'm finding is the things that are extreme seem to do better with the algorithm.
Hey guys, and welcome to Kindness with Amy. Today I am joined yet again by James Wilks. He is winner of the Ultimate Fighter, film producer, and creator of Game Changers. And right now, as we are filming this, he is filming Game Changers 2, which is super exciting because it is one of my favorite documentaries on Netflix. And I highly recommend to see it if you have not seen it yet. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
Thanks for coming again.
Yeah, good to be back.
I can't remember when we last shot. I feel like it was over a year ago now.
Yeah.
Easily.
So almost 2 maybe.
Yeah, when I was in LA for the 𝐴VA conference.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So one thing that's quite reoccurring that I see on my podcast is people saying that animal protein is a requirement to build muscle. So as an athlete, James, would you say that plant protein is superior to animal protein when it comes to building muscle mass?
Well, I think it's a little bit nuanced. So I think in terms of just building muscle, you can build muscle with a plant-based diet or mostly plants or animal-based diet or mostly, meat. The difference is around other aspects, so blood flow, inflammation, which are reduced, increased blood flow and reduced inflammation on a plant-based diet. So in terms of just building muscle mass in the short term, I think it's quite clear in the science that you can build muscle either way. But in terms of, endurance, blood flow, things like that, it's going to be improved as you shift towards eating more plant foods, especially whole plant foods. And so those are, I think, where you're getting improved recovery as well. That's where you're seeing the benefits in the scientific literature.
Why is it that plant protein leads to better recovery?
Well, particularly there's less saturated fat, right? And saturated fat has been shown to increase inflammation. And that inflammation is detrimental in recovery and can be detrimental in blood flow. And obviously, when you're 22 years old, for example, it might not make that much of a difference, right? But over time, when you're reducing your blood flow, for example, that's going to show up. And so that's why we see a lot of these high-level athletes, as they get later in their careers, ones that are really been in their careers for like 20 years, tend to be eating more plant-based.
So we often see, James, guys in the gym, especially I've noticed this in India, that trainers will be telling guys that in order to get big and to get muscles, they need to be consuming animal protein, and they will suggest to people to have eggs, to have chicken, and these are the best things for them to have to get big muscles. So what is your opinion on this? Is it a requirement to have meat at all to get muscles?
No, not at all. I mean, it's a long-standing myth. When we put out the Game Changers, a lot of people did shift their opinion, but there's still, this sort of gym bro science suggesting that you need meat and other animal protein. It's just not true. Some of the studies years ago were looking at short-term, what's called acute muscle protein synthesis, and there seemed to be a little bit better if you were certain, it depended on the level in the short term. But in terms of what actually matters, in terms of gaining muscle, we always want to look at the outcome data. So what happens when you eat this versus that? And it's shown you can build just as much muscle just as easily on a plant-based diet, as long as you're getting enough protein. On either diet, if you don't get enough protein, you won't maximize muscle mass. But as long as you're getting enough protein, and I would say, to be fair, you do have to be a little bit more cognizant. So if you've been eating meat and animal products, and then you just take the meat and other animal products off your plate and just eat the vegetables and the pasta, then you might not be getting enough protein.
Exactly.
So I think, to be fair, there's a lot of people in the plant-based movement that just don't want to think that protein's an issue at all. It is an issue. You have to be cognizant. So you want to make sure you're getting in beans, lentils, and nuts and things like this, something with a decent amount of protein. And of course, you can always do protein powders. You don't have to, but it makes it convenient sometimes. And people will say, oh, well, if you have to have protein powder, well, you don't have to. Then it can't be a natural diet or whatever. But the funny thing is that most protein powder is whey from animal products. And now there's even sort of grass-fed beef protein powder.
Oh my God.
Which is one of the worst things, especially for the environment, because beef is the worst thing for the environment anyway. And then you concentrate that into a powder.
Not according to Elon Musk, though. He said it makes no difference if people eat steaks.
Yeah, well, he's focused obviously on the sort of energy sector. But Elon's a smart guy, but obviously hasn't done the research in terms of food.
Okay, so something I wanted to do today is responding to some of these crazy reels that come into my feed.
Sure.
The algorithm feeds them to me. So let's start. The first one is on seed oils.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been pretty popular, talking smack on seed oils recently.
These are the things that I think are most problematic for humans. And the top three, the first one is seed oils. Minimize the amount of linoleic acid in your diet and you will do better. The second is processed sugar. And I think that that's in contradistinction to sugar that is found in fruit or honey that is raw and organic. And the third one is probably gluten. So if people eliminate those three things, I think their health will massively improve. This is really an important thing for me in this work. I want to help people understand from a medical perspective.
Sure. So he's touching on three things there, but seed oils, let's touch on that to start with.
Yeah, sure.
Funny thing, people are saying it's heavily processed, or it was originally developed for being an industrial lubricant, like in engines, for example. Yes. But just because something was developed for one thing doesn't mean it's not okay for something else. So, for example, the other thing that people mention is if something's got a name you can't pronounce or you don't know, it must be bad for you. But for example, dihydrogen monoxide is a coolant used in rocket engines. A lot of people don't realize that dihydrogen monoxide is literally just and you would assume therefore it's bad. They don't realize it's just the scientific name for water. So you can't say just because something's a rocket coolant that it's bad for you, because I think we all know that we need to drink water, right? So just because something was an industrial lubricant originally doesn't mean it's bad. So what we should look at is not like where that came from or what it was originally used for, but let's look at the outcome data, which is higher in the evidence, the scientific evidence hierarchy. And so if we look at the randomized controlled trials, looking at 10 studies, none of them showed increased inflammation, which is the main thing that these influencers are saying is wrong with seed oils. And in fact, 3 of them showed decreased inflammation. When you compare that to saturated fats, there was a meta-analysis of 55 studies and which showed 29% increased risk of cancer. So if you look at the outcome data in the science, it's very clear if you're going to choose between something high in saturated fat, whether that's butter or ghee, and to be fair, even palm oil, things like that, you're much better off switching to vegetable oil. Now, you don't have to have oil. You can have fat from avocado and nuts and seeds. But if you're going to have oils, you're actually significantly better off eating seed, or what's also known as vegetable oils, in the scientific literature in terms of the outcome data.
That's so interesting, James, because you ask anyone, everyone has this idea implanted in their mind now that seed oils are bad.
I know.
Butter and ghee is good.
Yeah, even my son came into the kitchen the other day. He says, "Bro, are you using seed oils?" He's only 15. And I said, "Yeah, what's wrong with seed oils?" And he's like, I don't know, they're bad for you. I'm like, what's bad about them? I don't know. I just saw it on social media.
Exactly. That's the thing. My friend said that to me the other day as well. She's like, "Oh, I'm not going to have that oat milk because it's got seed oils in it."
Yeah.
I'm like, "But why is it bad?"
Yeah, and it's pretty clear to me that it's sort of being started by the meat industry, because seed oils or vegetable oils are used in plant-based meats and plant-based milks. And we've seen a lot of social media talking smack about plant-based eating, especially since the Game Changers came out. There's always that pendulum that swings one way or the other. So Game Changers, most viewed documentary of all time, over 250 million views. huge impact, tripled interest in plant-based eating. Well, what's going to happen? In fact, if you look at Google Trends, you'll start seeing the carnivore diet only picking up very shortly after the game changers. And unfortunately, recently, in the last 6 months, it surpassed the search for plant-based eating. And in January was triple the search for carnivore as it was for plant-based on Google. So it's pretty sad, but it swings one way, it swings the other. Unfortunately, these days, looking at the actual evidence isn't, how people are making a decision. They're looking at social media influencers. And if they take the shirt off and they're pretty in good shape, people listen to that, over anything else. But it's not telling you is what is their long-term health outcome, how active they're going to be in their 50s, 60s. And I think the science is pretty clear that you're increasing your risk for the major diseases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also with the carnivore diet, you might be able to do something very short burst like shot put or sprinting for 100 meters. And you also, on the other end, might be able to go for long walks because you can use fat as a body fat as an energy source. But anything in between, like most people, if they're playing sports like basketball, soccer, you're fighting in the UFC, a carnivore diet that's got very low carbohydrates, which are the hardworking muscles' primary fuel source, is absent. And so you really want to get some good carbs from, and where do carbs come from? Primarily from plants. So we want to get those in our diet.
I think that leads me to the next reel.
But you do not need to eat carbs. I haven't eaten a single carb piece of fruit or vegetable in 6 years, and I'm not dying of low energy, nor have I wrecked my hormones. I've actually lost 25 pounds, now have painless periods, unbelievably stable energy and mood because my body burns fat for fuel now. So who else has ditched the carbs?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, there's a few points there. Do we need carbs? They're not essential to eat. Because there's a survival mechanism where we end up using ketones. It's called being in ketosis. So where you're burning body fat for fuel, which is what she mentions there. She said, I'm burning body fat for fuel. And certainly you do burn more fat if you have a very high fat, low carb diet, but you're also depositing more fat. So the net is not any different, if that makes sense. So you're burning lots of fat, but you're also depositing fat, which stores as fat. Now, she lost weight. And that can happen often. That's also happened on a completely potato diet where someone's only eating potatoes, which is full of carbs, obviously, and very low fat. It's also been shown on a Twinkie diet where someone's only eating Twinkies, right? And so, and also with that, not only did the person on the Twinkie diet lose a lot of weight, but they also improve their blood markers. Anytime we reduce our body fat, and especially some of that visceral fat that's around the organs goes away, we tend to get improved blood markers, improved LDL and HDL, and that's happened with the Twinkie diet. In fact, I've seen this person before, and I've seen their blood work that they posted publicly online, and it was terrible, like really high LDL, which is a causal factor for atherosclerosis and heart disease. And so there's all sorts of ways you can lose weight. You could take cocaine and lose weight. It doesn't mean that it's good for you. And so what we really want to look at is the science and what risk factors are increasing. So she may be fine eating that way in the short term. She may have lost weight. She may feel okay. Doesn't mean that she's going to be able to perform athletically optimally at all. It doesn't look like she's as an athlete from the stuff that she's posted, but even, amateur athlete or weekend warrior, I don't think you'd have the energy to do any sort of fitness events. So that's one problem. And then increasing her risk for heart disease and cancer, as is shown in her blood work. So again, the human body is very adaptable, and we can eat almost anything and seem to do okay. But we want to look at what's going to give us not just a long lifespan, but a long health span where we're active and healthy during that life. So that's one of the problems there.
Yeah, it's like what we were discussing outside this podcast that I don't understand is we're not physically carnivores. So this fad that's come up in the last however long of eating a carnivore diet is literally going against our actual
anatomy,
physically going against our anatomy, right? So I was curious with Steak and Butter Girl because she's been carnivore now for 6 years. She's claiming and saying that she feels so good and just eating butter and just eating steaks. And I'm so curious how long this is going to last. Like, at what point is shit going to hit the roof?
Yeah, I mean, some people are, to be fair, there's a small number of people that are genetically adapted and better at being able to eat things high in saturated fat. So there's a small percentage of the population, for example, that can eat a lot of saturated fat and it doesn't really increase their LDL and cholesterol that much. Her LDL is significantly increased. But for example, the Inuit, they have become genetically adapted to being able to eat a lot more fat. Now, they still have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, which is contradictory to what you might hear on social media. There are certain people. It doesn't mean that there's a small handful of people that can sort of survive on it okay. It doesn't mean that it's, for the masses. And that's when you look at studies that have got large numbers of people, from the epidemiology that's looking at hundreds of thousands or millions of people, to also randomized controlled trials with smaller numbers, but a lot of people. And that's when we can see what foods are actually doing to our body in general, right? So, for example, you could have someone said to me the other day, well, my great-grandfather never wore a seatbelt. And he didn't get any, he had 7 accidents, but he never died or got significantly injured. And then I know another friend that wore a seatbelt and got in one accident and passed away. It doesn't mean that not wearing a seatbelt isn't the best thing to do if you're driving in a car. Does that make sense? You can't look at like single anecdotes. So maybe she's doing fine. Well, it doesn't look like she's doing fine, but like maybe she's doing okay in the short term at least, or midterm. But it's certainly going to have a long-term impact, likely on most people and likely on her as well. So
I just wonder if it's like, because she's saying that her period pain went away and her skin is cleared up and all this stuff. I know for me that I did a process of elimination. Like, I mean, obviously I'm vegan, but then in addition to that, I was having reactions to certain things. Like it might be certain oils or it might be certain vegetables. And just by process of elimination, I was able to take these things out, and suddenly the ailments that I was having with my gut or my skin or whatever, it went away.
Absolutely.
Right? So she's taken away that entire group of foods, right? And maybe 1 or 2 of those things was causing her to have the
100%.
reactions.
Yeah.
So now she's putting it to carnivore, but it could just be, she didn't have to take away all the vegetables.
It's basically not necessarily what she's eating, what she's not eating that might have given her the benefit. So that's called an elimination diet.
Yeah.
And people, again, do that often with like sweet potatoes. But the concept really there, when registered dietitians or nutritionists implement this for patients, is that they put them on one thing, and then what you're supposed to do is gradually increase the foods back in to see what was the problem. So you're taking the first step of an elimination diet, but you're not following up on the future steps.
Yeah.
So certainly from eliminating something that was bothering you, so for example, some people are allergic to peanuts, some people are allergic to nightshade vegetables, they have an issue. So it could have just been that one thing. You can't attribute it to necessarily just because you're eating meat or dairy. Maybe she cut out eating a bunch of sugar.
Yeah.
Who knows what she was eating before that could have been problematic.
I was talking to a doctor the other day and they were asking me where I get my protein. And I was explaining, all sorts of things, tempeh, tofu, etc. And then they were like, oh, don't eat too much tofu because it's not ideal for you. And it's especially not ideal for men who are under 30 years old. So we still see that there's a lot of misinformation around soy. And I know we spoke about this, which is insane. We spoke about this over a year ago with the amount of people that were saying that soy has estrogen, gives you boobs. We're still seeing an influx of this myth that soy is bad for men, especially men under 30. And literally doctors, especially in India, are running around saying that soy is bad for you.
Yeah, it's amazing how these long-standing myths just persist. And I can't remember how much we talked about it before, but that originally started because there were sheep that were eating clover in the ground, which had a specific phytoestrogen called genistein. And genistein is also found in soy. And so that was giving some of the sheep and rams fertility issues. And so they said, well, this must be bad. Must give fertility issues and increased gynecomastia, which is typically called as man boobs in men. And but you'd have to literally eat 1,000 soy burgers a day in order to get that much phytoestrogen from the genistein. So that's a bit crazy. And there were a couple of case studies, I think 2 case studies that I've heard of single individuals that were eating drinking a gallon of soy milk a day that had some issues, whether it was related to the soy or not. But in any sort of typical usual consumption, the studies really show there's no indication on fluctuating of the hormones at all. So if people are worried about estrogen, then they should be worried about animal products, especially milk. So the estrogen in meat and milk is identical to human estrogen. And of course, with cows, they're making them pregnant every year, right, to have the baby, to produce the milk, and there's loads of estrogen in that. So if people are worried about hormones and getting estrogen, especially men getting estrogen, they should be worried about meat and milk and not about plants and soy.
That's the wild thing, is that the estrogen in milk and meat is actually mammalian estrogen,
Right.
and then the phytoestrogen in soy is coming from plants, so it's not actually mammalian to begin with. So
Right.
it doesn't really influence our hormones
Yeah,
in the same way.
it does get quite complicated on the explanation. We have different types of estrogen receptors, alpha receptors and beta receptors, and the phytoestrogen does populate some of that. And in fact, if you are eating some animal products but eating lots of plants, that phytoestrogen can actually take up some of those receptors and actually block some of the animal estrogen from getting into those receptors.
So it's protective,
yes,
basically.
exactly. So even if you want to still eat some animal products, it's still great to get lots of plants in, including from soy, and that will actually could help potentially normalize hormone levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in another
Yeah.
2 years.
It's just
time.
what's crazy is it's literally the opposite, right? So that some of the stuff on social media about seed oils or soy
Yeah.
or whatever, it's literally the exact opposite
Yeah.
that's shown in the scientific literature.
Yeah, absolutely. But half of the things that we're seeing online is just literally not based on any science or any facts, though.
No.
It's just people either paid to do something or just their personal opinion, which is biased anyway.
Yeah, and also what I'm finding, I'm sure most people are noticing this as well, is the things that are extreme seem to do better with the algorithms. You get a lot of people arguing about it, and so it just, things that just seem crazy or extreme just do well on social media.
Absolutely. There was a ridiculous thing I saw 2 days ago, yesterday, of this man. He was raping a cow, and he put it on his Instagram of him doing it, and his friend is like, keep going. Okay, and so I reposted it on my Instagram to try and track this man down so we can obviously put him behind bars. But the thing is that rape is so rampant in India, especially of dairy cows and buffaloes. It's so rampant. We have a huge rape issue to begin with in India, but on top of that, we have a huge issue with dairy cows being raped. And the issue is so large that the laws against animal rape have been taken away because the volume is so high and the police don't want to deal with this. So it's wild. And Instagram deleted me putting that reel. And I'm like, hang on. We're just trying to find this guy, which is why we've put it. Instagram allows the craziest shit on on reels to be posted. Like, I'm watching like dogs being boiled alive, this is all allowed. But then, anyway.
Oh, crazy.
All right, okay. This one is great.
The Game Changers. The Game Changers has been quoted so many times. It is a vegan documentary about how veganism helped. What they don't tell you is that 3 or 2 of the superstars that were at the time vegans when the documentary was being recorded left the diet before the documentary got released. That's crazy. We are thinking right now veganism में कि हम animals को बचा लेंगे और सब कर लेंगे. That's all just false notion. Who are getting enticed on that? Young people, 18-year-old women who need that fat, who need that protein, who need that animal essential nutrients, choline, carnosine, creatine, vitamin B12, K, D2, ये सब सारे उसके bioavailable form में. They are rejecting it. They're going for veganism at that stage.
Well, there's a few things there. So number one is that's completely false. I don't know where he gets that claim from. I believe that there was one athlete that we'd filmed that ended up switching away from being plant-based, but incidentally has switched back now. But he was not in the film, in the cut to begin with. We filmed, there was 50 people that we filmed that unfortunately didn't make it into the cut. When you make a documentary, you have 600 hours of footage and you're trying to put, the best things that fit together well. And so there was one person that wasn't in the documentary, but not because I didn't even know when he wasn't included that he'd switched away from being plant-based. Number two, just because someone switches away from something doesn't mean it's not good. So someone could start an exercise program and quit the exercise program. That doesn't mean that exercise is bad for you.
Exactly.
Right? But the funny thing is he did actually switch back to being plant-based, 𝘚𝘩𝑒𝐿. So there's that. I forget what his other point was.
The second point was that it's influencing young women and they need the essential nutrients that comes from animal fats.
Oh, yeah. Well, I find this really interesting because this happens a lot, not just with this guy, but across sort of the carnivore and animal-based movement, is they list the number of nutrients that are in meat. Now, most of those were in plants, but they list nutrients in meat that are not in plants. But first of all, they're not essential and your body makes them. So, for example, creatine, your body makes about 1 gram of creatine a day. Now, there are benefits to increasing your creatine for muscle mass building, but even like Paul Saladino, who was originally the carnivore MD that switched away because he was getting heart palpitations, muscle cramps, couldn't sleep, he's now incorporating more plants. Even people like that take creatine outside of their meat. They take creatine powder, just like a lot of people take protein powder. And so just because something's absent, something doesn't mean it was beneficial to take exogenously, otherwise, in other words, from the outside. So where do those people think that the cows get it from? They manufacture it. So our body makes many of these things that they'll list. And what I really don't like on social media, and I saw Paul Saladino do this the other day, is he just goes up to someone in the grocery store and the guy goes, I'm vegan. He's like, okay, well, where do you get your choline, your creatine? And the guy's like, in plants. But the guy doesn't know that you don't need to get them from your diet because they're made in your body. So for example, creatine, carnitine, like these are the types of things that these animal-based advocates will list. Those aren't in plant-based foods, but they're made in your body. They're not essential, does that make sense? So you can catch people out that are lay people that haven't looked at the science because they don't know that you don't need to get them in your diet. So it sounds like, oh, I'm missing out on something. But all of the animals that we eat, like the cows, like where did they get it from? They didn't get it in their diet either, because animals are just the middlemen and they're eating plants. So cows, for example, don't consume any carnitine either, right? Their bodies make it just like ours do. So just because something's absent in the food doesn't mean that we should have had it exogenously. In fact, for example, with heme iron, people say, where are you going to get your heme iron from? Now, heme iron is problematic typically because if you have too much, your body can't regulate it. So heme iron is when the iron is attached to the hemoglobin, and when you consume non-heme iron, your body can regulate the uptake. Does that make sense? Okay. And then your body doesn't go over the amount of iron in your blood. But if you have too much heme iron, your body can't regulate it because it's already attached. And you can have too much, and that has been shown to increase risk of heart disease, increases inflammation. Does that make sense? So if an influencer on the animal-based side says, where are you getting your heme iron? Well, I don't need it. I have non-heme iron, and my body is actually much better able to regulate that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just because something's not in a food, it doesn't mean that it was even beneficial to have it in the food. And a great, case would be heme iron, for example. Non-heme iron is going to be much better regulated by the body. And so we shouldn't worry about some of these things that they're saying essential, which by definition are not essential and are made inside of our bodies.
So bottom line is, a woman who is young and impressionable does not need to be having animal products to get her essential nutrients. She can get them from plants.
She can get all the essential nutrients from plants, with the exception of B12, which we should be taking a supplement. But B12 also is not made by animals, right? It's made by bacteria in their gut. And again, a lot of animals are fed B12. And that's the other thing. People say, oh, you have to take supplements if you're vegan. But everyone's taking supplements. They're just taking them indirectly. So they're fed to the animals that they're eating typically. Does that make sense? So it's they're just the middlemen, whether it's protein.
Everyone says that. Everyone says that, the vegan diet's not great because you have to take all these supplements in order to be healthy. Whereas if you eat meat, you're getting all the required nutrients, forgetting that the animals are being fed supplements anyway. Yeah,
they're being fed. And another case in point is iodine. One of the top sources, at least in the US, is actually from potassium iodide, which is used for both cleaning the inside of milk tankers and the teats of the cows. So that's where people are actually getting it from, in their milk, but only because it was used as a cleaning aid. Does that make sense? Wow. So you're talking about supplements. You're getting it from cleaning sources. You're getting it from supplements fed to the animals.
Wow.
So for example, with B12, the best way to get B12, because again, food comes in a package, is just to take a supplement, right? It's not to get it, try and eat meat that's got all of the negative things that come along with it, just to get your B12. You can just take B12 that's just B12 in a supplement. It's a much more regulated amount. So 39% of people in the US are low in B12, and nearly all of them are meat eaters. So, you're just, even whether you're a meat eater or not, obviously it's good if you can get your blood checked. Not everyone in the world can afford to go and get those tests all the time. So the safest thing is, if you're not monitoring it, then it's just to take a B12 supplement, for example.
So James, is it harmful to be taking iron and B12 as supplements?
Well, first of all, let's address them separately. B12, for most people, they should probably be taking a B12 supplement, whether they eat meat or not, because as I said before, 39% of people are low in B12. And with B12, there's probably not an upper limit. It's probably safe. But with, you asked about iron was the other one? Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be taking too much iron. And depending on whether you're female or male, you should look at the recommendations. But not going to be a problem. Again, food comes in a package. And so when you have something that's beneficial in food, you might also be getting lots of negative things. So for example, the common one would be saturated fat in beef, for example. So we don't want to be taking too much iron, but we want to be taking enough. And getting a supplement is a clean, easy way to take it and a measured dose. So I don't see a problem with that at all.
But why are there these negative connotations with taking supplements? People look at it as though it's processed, it's unnatural, it's synthetic, and then there's a negative connotation with taking supplements.
Yeah, I mean, that's based on what's called the naturalistic fallacy. So there's this sort of appeal to nature where people think, well, if it's not natural, then it can't be good for me. But that's, I mean, antibiotic, if you've got a bacterial disease and taking antibiotics, that's not natural per se. Even the food that we eat these days is not natural, right? If you consider, it depends what you consider nature. I mean, you could say a city's not natural, or you could say, well, we evolved to be able to create cities and that's part of nature. Depends how you view nature. But I think there's a specific way of looking at nature and then saying, well, if my ancestors, like it's appeal to the ancestors as well. If my ancestors weren't eating it, but the ancestors were dying quite young. So I don't know why you'd want to, eat like your ancestors ate necessarily. But yeah, I think it's around this, appeal to nature. But we should look at the outcome data, and look at our blood work, and look at the studies. And what do we show? We show if we're getting sufficient iron, we're getting sufficient B12. There doesn't seem to be any detriment from getting it from a supplement. On the other hand, if you're getting it with all of the other things that come in meat and dairy, then it can be problematic.
Okay. All right, let me find the next one.
A lot of people in India do not have the privilege to eat beef, especially in North India. You get it in Goa and the southern states, but not in the north of India. So the next best red meat that we get access to is mutton. And yet a lot of people are scared of eating mutton, obviously because of the age-old myths of cholesterol and saturated fats. Look at the amino acid profile of mutton. It's got leucine, lysine, isoleucine, phenylalanine, methionine, threonine, tryptophan, histidine, the whole profile of essential amino acids, and in good amounts. Micronutrients, you ask? Look at the vitamin profile. It's got vitamin B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B12, vitamin E, choline, and the minerals, heme iron, sodium, potassium, calcium, manganese, selenium, copper, name it, it has it. So don't be scared of eating your red meats, especially not mutton in India.
Well, there's a couple of things that are funny there. So talked about essential amino acids. So all plants have all of the essential amino acids in varying proportions. So granted, if you only ate rice all day and that was the only food you ever ate, then you would be low in a specific, I think it's lysine, low in a specific essential amino acid. But same if you eat one animal food, you're going to be low in nutrients as well. Even if you eat a handful of animal food. In fact, if you only eat animal foods, you're going to be low. You're going to have no fiber, for example, which is actually a bigger problem than the protein. Like in the US, people are fiber deficient, not protein deficient. So again, it's just totally misinformation.
But why are these people pushing this idea of red meat?
I think it's multifactorial. I think there's a lot of influence from the animal foods industry. I think there's a sort of macho thing still, that we should be meat eaters and we're dominating the planet and we've got control of everything. I think dominion over the land doesn't really mean let's just dominate and smash and kill everything. I think it should be like more being like a guardian. Take care of it. So I think there's that. And then I think, when something swings one way, people swings the other, pendulum swings the other. And so plant-based eating got popular, especially after the Game Changers. And then people want to be contrarian, so it swings the other way. So I think there's a lot of things. The behavioral psychology research shows that young men especially are insecure about their masculinity. And there is evidence that's showing that in the short term, if men hear about animal suffering, they eat less animal products. but we have this internal peer group saying, hey, you're being a bit compassionate. Compassion is synonymous with femininity. They feel like they're being a bit more feminine, so they need to feel like they're being more masculine. So Man the Hunter. In fact, we interviewed the gentleman that put together the Man the Hunter conference in 1967, an anthropologist, and the finding of that conference, that Man the Hunter was a misnomer, and that it should have been man, the gatherer, scavenger, hunter, in that order. We were gathering first, scavenging second, and hunting third, because hunting was very inefficient until about 70,000 years ago with the advent of bow and arrow, and before the bow and arrow. And so we evolved during that time, right, and including our brains. And in fact, Richard Wrangham, who's the chair of anthropology at Harvard, his thesis is that cooking actually made us human, and particularly the cooking of starches. So underground storage organs, so tubers and potatoes and things like that, you can't really eat them raw. And we were able to cook, and it coincides, cooking and the control of fire actually coincides with the increase of amylase, which is the enzyme in the mouth that breaks down starches. So it is hypothesized that it wasn't meat eating that made us human, but actually cooking. And certainly meat was, one on the list, but down the list. But being able to cook starches, because there's studies now showing that foraging societies can gather about 4,000 calories an hour, a single person, by digging up tubers and potatoes under the ground. And so this myth that meat made us human, or that we have to have it, that's what it is. It's a myth.
There is actually a reel that I have specifically about this.
After agriculture, the adult male brain capacity reduced by 11%. Female adult brain capacity went down by 17%. And the average height went down by about 5 inches. That wasn't over hundreds of years or thousands of years. That wasn't an adaptation process. That was overnight in the fossil record. So that happened immediately, and that's persisted until today. And we saw this in real time, the Native Americans, the Native Canadians, the Native Australians, and we're seeing it in the Maasai as well, who are traditionally carnivores. So they have a large portion of that carnivore diet being milk, but milk, blood, and meat is their staple diet. And they started introducing some plants throughout the 20th century, and they started getting some of these human diseases throughout the 20th century as well. Now they have Coca-Cola trucks going to the Masai Mara and these little villages, and they sell out very quickly because they don't know how harmful this stuff is. And now their diabetes is actually going up, and their tooth decay is going up, and their chronic diseases are going up.
Yeah, well, I don't doubt that if you're drinking lots of soda, your tooth decay goes up. So again, it's like probably some truth in there. But in terms of, saying that disease goes up, if you actually look at mummified remains of some of these tribes, and including the Inuit, there was clear evidence of heart disease of people in their 40s. And 50s estimated, even 30s. This notion that we lived to a long age and we were all super healthy, before the advent of industrial agriculture is just false. We certainly know that industrial agriculture has created a whole bunch of, products that aren't good for you, right? Like most of the stuff in the grocery store isn't that great for you, right? Like all these cookies and like white flours and things full of sugar. Yeah, that's not good for you. It doesn't mean you can't eat it ever, but you should really sort of minimize or eat those things in moderation and focus on whole plant foods. But to indicate that plants in general are bad for you, it just goes against everything in the scientific literature.
Yeah, it's wild.
Wild.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're nearing the end. Oh, this is a fun one.
Spinach is not good for us. Almonds are not good for us. Cashews are not good for us. People think I'm just being extreme when I say things like that. But the truth is that we're not squirrels. We're not rabbits. We have a certain niche that we've had on this planet for well over 1 million years. And modern ideas and modern philosophies suggest that we can eat these plant foods, but it probably isn't optimal for human beings. And it can be, in fact, undermining the health that you want, making you old, cranky, tired way before your time.
Yeah, just madness. I don't know. First of all, the one thing I agree on is like superfood. I don't think it's a great term, because I don't necessarily agree that there are things that are superfoods. Certainly some foods are better than others, but I don't know about that category. And there's no scientific definition for superfood, so I think people should be cautious when using that term. So I agree with her there. But just because we're not some of those animals that you mentioned doesn't mean that it's not good for us. The 1 million years, I'm not sure what she's referring to. Modern Homo sapiens have been around between 200,000 and 300,000 years, according to anthropologists. So maybe she's talking about ancestors. And if you want to talk about ancestors, I don't understand, like the paleo diet, why people focus on a specific part of history where certainly parts of the world ate quite a bit of meat, typically away from the equator, because around the equator we have 12 hours of sunshine, 12 hours of darkness, plenty of rain, and so plants are abundant, which is where they think that humans began. And as we move away from the equator, we are forced to eat more animal products because of availability of plants. So if you look at the foraging societies, what they're eating is dependent on how far they are from the equator. But in terms of looking at ancestors, and she's saying 1 million years ago, and if you look during that period and other parts of the Paleolithic period, I don't know why you want to look at that. If you look further back, those ancestors were actually frugivores, eating a lot of fruit. So it just depends on what period you want to look at. And I don't know why we should just only look at back. It's interesting for forming hypotheses about what we should be eating. But what we really want to look at is what is the modern nutritional science showing us, and what is the outcome data. And when we eat certain foods or dietary patterns, what leads to longer health term outcome and lifespan and health span versus what leads to worse, increased risk of disease, lower lifespan, lower health span. And we just see it's very clear. If we're eating predominantly whole plant foods, then we're better off than eating foods a diet high in animal-based foods.
I just find it ludicrous, like if someone slaps on some glasses and makes a reel and says something with confidence, as ludicrous as it may be, someone will watch that and be like, oh, I need to avoid spinach and avoid cashews and avoid these things, which are perfectly healthy for you to have. If you're not allergic to them, perfectly fine to have.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, people just don't have the time to read the scientific literature themselves. And unfortunately, if someone is compelling and they sound confident and they look good, or you relate to them in some way, you're more likely to believe in their information. So I do think it's challenging for people, but the science is pretty clear.
Exactly. There was a guy that had said that being vegetarian in India leads to you having stunted growth, which is why we have such a big issue in India with children being stunted because of vegetarianism. And he married these two things together, even though that makes no sense.
India is the only country in the world where the average height hasn't gone up. This insistence on vegetarianism, this actual moral policing on vegetarianism is costing us dearly. And we have children who are skidding, who are not tall, who are malnourished. And that's a serious issue. Very often on TV when I bring this up with the BJP, and I say this with the BJP because BJP supporters tend to moral police on this. They want everything to be vegetarian, or they try to make it vegetarian. They say, oh, but hum dal de rahe. How much protein are you going to get in dal?
Nothing.
Now in Maharashtra, they said, oh, eggs will not be given in midday meals. It's not right. If you're vegetarian, I respect it.
Right.
But why are you imposing your choice on me? It is wrong. You are harming the country's future. I do hope that we can have a solution where we can start serving meat to children.
Or like vegetarian-based protein powders?
Absolutely. Maybe even lab-grown meat. Whatever you do. Let's come out with alternate. Maybe insects.
Yeah.
But
great source of protein.
Is that great? And it can solve the protein problem of the world.
Yeah, you do need calcium. Very interesting on dairy. Sorry, last point on that. But, in marketing, you call it a USP, unique selling point. And so they just said, okay, we've got these cows that are docile and produce tons of milk. What can we say about it? Oh, it's got calcium. Oh, well, let's say that. But like magnesium's also important for bone health. A cup of collard greens has more calcium than a cup of milk, but also has lots of magnesium, which is important for bone health. So the dairy industry's done a great job of sort of saying, hey, you need dairy for calcium. But there's plenty of calcium in plant-based foods and also magnesium, and we just don't need dairy. In fact, there's an inverse correlation between countries with the highest dairy intake and hip fracture rates. So the more dairy countries typically have higher hip fracture rates, and hip fracture rates are a good indication of bone health. So you just don't need dairy.
Well, it's like how we read in China study that people that consume higher amounts of dairy tend to have higher amounts of osteoporosis compared to people that do not consume dairy. They're still getting calcium. The problem is, as you said, if an idea is fed long enough to people, they will honestly believe it to be truth. Right? Whether it's like religion or whatever. You tell someone anything long enough, it'll become fact in their mind.
Yeah.
And hence why everyone does correlate calcium with milk, protein with meat. And that now these things are coming out more with access to information through social media, documentaries, all this stuff. But with that comes misinformation as well, I guess.
Totally.
On both ends. So there was one video that I recently watched. There's a YouTube channel called We Are Stupid. And this man has basically debunked or thinks he's debunked vegans who have their children growing up on a vegan diet. And he's basically saying that it's okay for you to be vegan, but if you are having your children grow up on a vegan diet, then that is leading them to have deficiencies, and it's irresponsible for you to do that. So I wanted to know from your opinion, if you raise children on a vegan diet, can they be getting all of the nutrients that they require?
Totally. Well, I mean, personally, I've raised my kids both vegan, and they seem to be doing just fine. My son's wrestling in high school, my daughter's totally fine health-wise. So again, that's just anecdotal. But even the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which, as I've said before, is influenced by the meat and dairy industry, has said that a vegan diet, completely vegan diet, is not only fine for all stages of the life cycle, including children and adolescents, but it will potentially can lead to a reduced risk of the major chronic diseases. So it's very clear that even a completely vegan diet, plant-based or completely vegan diet, can provide all of the nutrients, not only to survive, but to thrive.
I think it's just that maybe people don't know exactly what to feed their children, for example, and maybe there's a few anecdotes that make it seem like vegan is unhealthy or something like that girl that died from that raw vegan chick that died or whatever. But the thing is, she wasn't drinking water for 6 years, she was eating one type of fruit. So you're ignoring these parts and just saying vegan influencer dies. Or you have these crazy parents that don't feed their kids properly and then they die, and then they just focus on the word vegan. It's just, to me, it's just so basic. If your children are getting the basic nutrients they need, which we know you can get from an omnivorous diet or a vegan diet, then your child will be healthy.
Certainly.
But you have to know where the nutrients are coming from.
Yeah, and I do think if you're going to have a vegan pregnancy or you're going to have vegan children, there are, a few great books out there. And so you do want to read up on that from credible sources, just to make sure you're getting the nutrients.
Absolutely.
That you need.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, is there any juicy, exciting things you can share about GC2?
Well,
that you're allowed to share.
I mean, it's a little bit under wraps. We're certainly going to be looking at examining that. We've got some great athletes in there, world-leading athletes at the top of their game, and certainly have longevity in their careers. And they're really touching on the planetary stuff, but I think people are just going to have to watch it and see what's in it.
How exciting. Well, I'm sure, especially in India, it's been really well received, Game Changers, so I'm sure people will be super excited to watch.
Yeah, I think one thing I could mention is that we'll be having film, so.
Ooh, how exciting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, James. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and as always, I learned so much from our conversations.
All right, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.